Ah! 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 I've got a Countach!
Yes, I do. This is the new Lamborghini Countach LPI-800-4, a modern interpretation of a legend. A car that was once so desirable, half the petrol-head world would crawl on their bellies across hot coals to own one. It's been revived as a limited-run series, celebrating the icon that laid the foundations for the Lamborghini legacy. Only 112 will be made, with each costing an astonishing 2.4 million euros. Inspired by the past, they say, yet made for the future.
And nowadays, the future means electrification. So that's exactly what Lamborghini have done. This car uses the familiar 6.5 litre naturally aspirated V12, but this time it's been hooked up to a 34 horsepower electric motor, and it's not one that uses batteries. This one uses a supercapacitor.
That gives it some serious shove. Total horsepower is a generous 819 PS. 0 to 62 takes 2.8 seconds, and the top speed is an astonishing 220 miles an hour.
Wow, big numbers, big numbers. You can actually feel it's gonna be a quick car before you even really step on it. And I tell you what, with numbers like that, I think it'll be a little bit of a shame if you didn't indulge in that old Lamborghini party trick. It'll be a launch control. Let's try one, shall we? I know the procedure. Corsa. Manual. Foot on the brake. Thrust mode possible. Hang on to your hats, boys and girls. This is going to be a £2.5 million send. Oh my... Jeez. This thing is an absolute animal. It's so fast. So fast. It's a savage. It's even more mental than the Aventador, if that's even possible. The way it just throws you down the road and then snaps your neck with every single gear change. This might be a more futuristic Lambo, but trust me when I tell you, it's still got that old school Lambo savagery. Jeez.
It's quick then, a true Lamborghini. But is it a true Countach? Well, the jury might be out. You see, below the all-carbon bodywork, this Countach uses the same platform as the Aventador, so its exterior design follows the constraints of that car. That means it's a far cry from the wild, bewinged LP400S that Leonardo DiCaprio climbed so gracefully aboard in The Wolf of Wall Street. But if you look closely, it does pay homage to the icons that came before, specifically the original Countach, the LP500.
The Countach is one of very few Lamborghinis that isn't named after either a bull or a bullfighter. The word comes from the Piedmontese dialect and it means plague. This is literally the Lamborghini plague. Now apparently they use the word to express amazement. So when they see something cool, they go, plague. A bit like we use uncouth words to express amazement like, oh, you get the point. Now, to be fair, when I first saw this car in pictures, I wasn't blown away. However, in person, it's absolutely gorgeous. And to be fair to Lamborghini, there's a lot of features that pay homage to the original Lamborghini Countach, and a lot of features that are definitely plague. First of all, it has a really distinctive wedge shape to it with a really low front end and a really thin bonnet, which is embedded slightly. And on the left-hand side, you'll find the Countach badge, just as you might on the original car. The bonnet itself has very similar lines to the original Countach, and when you look closely just up here, you'll find a floating spoiler section, which you don't notice at first, but when you see it, you start to really appreciate it. The headlights don't pop up. That will be illegal nowadays because of safety concerns, but Lamborghini have at least incorporated a set of rectangular lights instead of the Y-shaped lights that you get on the Aventador, and I think they look pretty cool. In profile, it's so low and aggressive with these really spectacular telephone dial style wheels inspired by the original car. Where the wheels on the OG car were like 14 inches, these are massive, offset too, 20 inches on the front, 21s at the rear, and then of course we have a Lamborghini staple, the scissor doors, and if that's not plague, I really don't know what is. Then this enormous NACA style duct feeding air into that 6.5 litre V12, and a smaller set of air scoops just above that, which again inspired by the original Countach. Now, it's a bit smaller and a bit less silly, and speaking of a bit less silly, it doesn't have a permanent rear wing. But then again, neither did the original LP-400, so I can forgive that, even though it's not quite giving me plague vibes. What is giving me plague vibes though, is this back end. It's absolutely sensational and looks a bit like the Lamborghini Cyan hypercar, especially with these 6 individual hexagons for brake lights, this enormous protruding prolapse of a rear diffuser with the integrated quad exhausts, the inverted wedge shape, and the massive 355 section tires. It's glorious to look at. Is it just an Aventador with a body kit? Is it worth 2.5 million euros? Only you can be the judge, but for me, forget plague, this is a pandemic on wheels.
That being said, the interior perhaps doesn't quite live up to the 2.4 million euro price tag, mainly on the basis that it's very reminiscent of the Aventadors. The center stack contains the same button layout, although the car features the updated infotainment system with a vertical display lifted from the Huracan. It even has a special button marked Stile, Italian for style, which reminds those on board of the Countach design philosophy. And there are other nice touches too. The geometric stitching on the leather seats and dashboard reference the square motif on the 70s original, plus there are 3D printed vents, odd given how inexpensive a technique that is. More impressive is the roof, which is inspired by the periscopio design of the original. That car's limited rear visibility required engineers to create a hollowed out roof section giving line of sight to the rear view mirror. It's not strictly necessary here, but the shape is a clever nod to the past. The photochromatic glass, which switches from translucent to opaque at the touch of a button, is a welcome addition in the present.
That price tag is also down to the fact that it uses a very exotic powertrain. Again, 6.5 litre naturally aspirated V12 just behind me, which makes 785 horsepower, and an E-motor, which makes an additional 34 horsepower. Not crazy amounts coming from the electric side, but the interesting thing isn't the motor, it's where the power comes from. It uses the supercapacitor, which comes from the Cyan.
The supercapacitor offers up to 3 times the power of an equivalent battery for the same weight and packaging. This means Lamborghini could drive the 34 horsepower electric motor without a lithium-ion pack adding significant amounts of weight, a big problem in electrified supercars. Dry, the Countach weighs 1,596 kilograms.
The other advantage is that it stores and discharges energy a lot quicker than a traditional battery. In other words, it will help you deplete the power to give you the full force of acceleration, but then when you brake and you slam on the yankers and activate those carbon ceramic brakes, it fills up again within a couple of braking zones. So the energy is never completely depleted and you never have to plug it in to charge it. It's literally always ready to go.
The purpose of the motor isn't to increase peak power, however. Its job is to add torque at low revs. As responsive as the naturally aspirated V12 might be, it still has gaps in its performance low down. The motor's purpose is to fill those gaps on initial acceleration until the engine is in the sweet spot and can take over. As for anyone asking whether it could also fix the Aventador's sluggish gear changes in Strada and in Sport, I have a definitive answer.
No. It's still reasonably sluggish. I mean, look at this, I'm in Strada right now, I change gear, and there's a little bit of a delay still when you change gear. There's an interruption in torque, despite the E-motor trying to help out. Where the electric motor comes in really handy though is in Corsa, the most aggressive mode. I'll knock it down a couple of cogs. Watch this. I mean, it literally wants to snap your head off your shoulders.
Perhaps the biggest benefit is in improving traction. In the wet especially, the Aventador felt prone to losing traction due to its aggressive shifts. Lamborghini say the e-motor can give the Countach 10% more traction between gear shifts due to slightly less aggression. Not that it feels that way. If anything, the Aventador's party piece, these dramatic gear changes, feel just as violent as ever.
What's it like elsewhere? Well, it's a lot like an Aventador actually. Got very meaty steering. Still quite direct despite being all-wheel drive, not bristling with feel and feedback. This isn't a car you drive with your fingertips, it's more a car you grip onto the steering wheel and pray while shouting, Countach! It definitely feels as solid and as substantial as you'd expect from a car with a carbon chassis. There's loads of grip from these enormous tyres. I don't think it would be quite as quick as an Aventador SVJ through the corners, particularly because it doesn't have the ALA aerodynamics that the SVJ does. However, based on the fact it's got significantly more power than the SVJ, I think the Countach is the quicker car in a straight line by some margin. Shout out to the noise as well. Serious plague. It's got all the pops and bangs that you'd expect on the downshift, on the upshift. I actually think it sounds a little bit more mechanical than the Aventador SVJ. You can really hear that motor just behind your head. The ICE motor behind your head makes a very significant noise in this car. Even though it's electrified, it still sounds raw. And that exhaust, wonderful, wonderful. How do you sum up a car like the Lamborghini Countach? Well, I don't think anything I say particularly matters because they're only making 112 of them. They cost 2.4 million euros each, and they've all been sold. So my opinion, ultimately, is a bit worthless. But for what it's worth, I think they're bloody brilliant. I will say this, the original Countach was one of the most polarizing, divisive, and spectacular cars ever to grace the face of the planet. And this hyper-modern, hyper-exclusive reimagining, trust me, it's a chip off the old block.